And as promised, let's bring in a member of the Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. Congressman, thanks again for being with us. I want to ask you about this story about the Secret Service accused of deleting text messages could be critical to the investigation of the events surrounding the attack. It was a letter this week to both the House and Senate Homeland Security Committees. DHS Inspector General writing after his office requested full electronic records for an evaluation of the Capitol attack. The Secret Service deleted a significant number of text messages from January 5th and January 6th of 2021. NBC News obtained that letter after The Intercept first reported it. The Secret Service denies the messages were deleted with any malicious intent. So the DHS IG sent this to you all on the committee as well. What more can you tell us about those text messages, why they were deleted, and what you are looking to find in them?
Thanks for having me. Look, we don't know anything more than what you just reported at this point. It's obviously an alarming thing to learn that there were Secret Service text messages from January 6th itself and also the day before that were deleted as part of a device replacement program. We don't know what the facts are, and we're going to get to the facts about why that happened, and we're going to do whatever we can to retrieve the substance of those texts. You know, fortunately, the chair of our committee, Benny Thompson, is also the chair of the Homeland Security Committee. So he's very well versed in this kind of thing, and we'll get to the bottom of it.
And clearly those are critical texts from the 5th and the 6th, giving Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony about what she reports to have heard from Secret Service agents about the president's behavior on the 6th specifically. So we'll look for more on that. Let's look ahead, Congressman, to next Thursday's hearing. You all sort of gave a preview of what's to come, those 187 minutes between Donald Trump's speech on the ellipse and when he finally made that video calling on his supporters to go home. What should we expect to see? What should the American public expect to hear in that hearing?
Well, you know, any other U.S. president from George Washington to John Adams to Thomas Jefferson all the way through Barack Obama would have immediately mobilized the machinery of the U.S. government and the military to be at the ready, if not to get involved within the first 5 or 10 minutes of the crisis. And if it were indeed people that they had called into action in order to stop the steal or to have a rally against the peaceful transfer of power, and it's hard to imagine any of them doing that in the first place, but certainly they would have called upon their followers immediately to go home and to get out of the Capitol and to stop attacking police officers. But instead, there was 187 minutes that we will describe of profound dereliction of duty. And at various points, the president essentially exhorting his followers, egging them on further, telling them that Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what he needed to do, praising them, lavishing compliments on them about how great they are and how much he loves them and so on. So we'll get into all of that, and America will be able to see what President Trump did during this unprecedented and shocking assault on the U.S. Congress, on the Vice President of the United States, all of it flowing from a call by this president to come to Washington for a big protest that would be wild.
It's really been incredible, the remarkable amount of work this committee has done. By the way, there are ways to retrieve deleted texts. If for some reason the Secret Service has a policy of deleting texts, it just seems wild that anyone in the U.S. Secret Service would have a policy of deleting text messages. I don't know. It seems weird, but there are ways to get them back. A number of different ones. Congressman, I'm curious. Do you believe the committee? Do you think the committee will be talking with President Trump or Vice President Pence directly?
Oh, but I've got no idea about that. You know, I don't know what's going to happen with respect to any of that. I'll tell you what happened during the impeachment trial. I sent a letter to President Trump inviting him to come and testify, and it was rejected by his lawyers in less time than it took Donald Trump to respond to the insurrectionary mob violence at the Capitol. They rejected it immediately. And of course, any lawyer worth his salt is not going to want Donald Trump to be anywhere near being sworn under oath, because he obviously is a compulsive liar. I think he was lying at the rate of something like 8 or 10 lies a day before he left office.
And as we await the final hearing, potentially final hearing, at what rate is new evidence coming in, and how might that change whether or not there will be more hearings?
Well, I've learned to say in this process with the January 6th Select Committee, never say never. You know, we have had to move hearings around, change the days of hearing, change the times of hearings because of new witnesses coming forward with startling new evidence. And it's our obligation under House Resolution 503 to get all of the facts of what happened on January 6th out to the American people and to Congress, as well as to try to define the causes of these events, who caused them, why did they cause them. And then the final part of it, of course, will be to make recommendations about how to fortify American democratic institutions against coups and insurrections and political violence and efforts to hijack our election process in the future.
Member of the Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack, Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning. We appreciate it.